Hey everybody, it's Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here at WCNC Charlotte. So today's live stream is going to be about my winter forecast, which was issued last week on Thursday. If you missed it, we're going to show it to you here in a minute. But if you want to ask a question or comment, you're going to have to subscribe to our channel. That's the only way you can comment in the YouTube channel as well. If you're on Facebook or Twitter or any of these other sources, we'll try to get your answers in there as well, and I'll see your comments. But I want you to make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Weather IQ page, because that's where primarily we're going to push most of our weather content. It's a great platform. We will stream severe weather there. You'll see my weather vlogs exclusively there, as well as our Weather IQ stories. But if you missed the winter weather outlook, and I know some of you may have not seen it, let me show you what it looks like, and we'll replay it again for those that have seen it already. And at the end of it, if you have a question or comment, or there's something that was a burning question you had about the upcoming winter, this is your chance to grill me about the winter forecast. And we'll try to get into the nuts and bolts of what went into it, my 19th year of doing this. But let's take a look at that winter weather forecast in case you missed it, which debuted last Thursday at 11 p.m. Winter weather is going to be upon us before you know it, from cold temperatures to wet roads and, yes, even some snow. Greetings from Beech Mountain. I'm Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich, and over the next couple of minutes, I'll reveal what could increase or decrease our chances of seeing some snow. Last winter, we had 3 consecutive snow events, and if you like that, you're going to love this upcoming winter because the impact on last winter was La Nina, which is in effect again this year for the 3rd year in a row. And if you forgot, La Nina typically means warm and dry conditions for the Carolinas, but occasionally, like we saw last year, La Nina can overproduce on snowfall. Here's a longer look at what those phases of El Nino, La Nina, and the neutral phase mean for our upcoming winter. Over the past decade, our average snowfall has fallen from 4.3 inches per winter to 3.5 inches, and this is primarily due to climate change. We have seen warmer ocean and warmer air temperatures, which has really reduced our snowfall totals. But because of that lower average, it's actually easier now to have above average snowfall in the upcoming winter. Now, drought is going to be an issue this upcoming season. I would expect most of the Carolinas will see drought conditions continue. Like the rest of the country, over 80% of the lower 48 is currently in drought. Now, because the temperatures are going to be warmer than average, I would expect 1 to 2 degrees above because of that La Nina pattern, which is very typical. That also means precipitation-wise. If you look at precipitation, likely a little bit below average again for this upcoming winter because of the ongoing drought. And then snowfall. That's what everybody wants to know about. I do expect above average snowfall this upcoming winter, but just a little bit, maybe an inch or 2 above average. Even in a La Nina winter, you can get a couple of good storms like I do expect to overproduce on snowfall. So now I'm at the top of Beech Mountain to talk about specific snowfall forecasts for a few locations. In the Charlotte area, I'm going to forecast about 5 inches of snow. That's above our average, though, of 3.5 inches over the entire winter season. In Hickory, I'm going to forecast about 8 inches of snow. That's a little bit more than Charlotte, but much more than average in Hickory as well. Their average is only about 6.9 inches of snow. Now in the mountains in Boone, we're talking at least 33 inches of snow, which is a lot of snow for Boone, but that's only above their average of 25.5 inches for the entire winter season. So when we do get snow in Charlotte, one of the ways we communicate the impacts of that snow on your life is our snow meter. We've been using this for years, and one of the ways we communicate that is on a 0 to 10 scale of the impacts on your life from winter weather. We start at the low end, 0 to 3. This is what I like to call social media rumors. This is where people talk about the chance of snow, but honestly, probably not going to amount to a whole lot. As you move up the scale, from 4 to 7, this is where things get a little more interesting. Legit snow chances, and we actually start to see people go to the grocery store and buy up all the bread and milk. Things start to close down, schools, businesses, a lot of virtual and remote work nowadays. As you move to the high end, 7 to 10, this is where the heavy snow moves in. We haven't seen this very often, but you need a shovel and you need a sled because you actually can have to shovel out the driveway and you can sled on some real snow. As you know, it doesn't take much snow to cause issues on the roads. Even an inch can cover the roads completely. You get to 3 inches, starts covering up the bottom of your tire, makes it difficult to travel. Once you get to 6 inches, you're going to be hitting your hubcap or your wheel cover, and it's going to take about 200 feet to stop, and travel is going to be really, really difficult. If we ever see a foot or 2 of snow, you're talking up here, maybe all the way halfway up your tire or more. it's difficult to travel at all and probably better off just to stay at home and hunker down. All right, so that was the winter forecast. We released that last Thursday at 11 p.m. And one of the first things you saw us talk about was La Nina. Now, a lot of folks have heard of El Nino, La Nina. I see people confuse these all the time. La Nina is the opposite of El Nino. Now, La Nina means we have warmer or cooler than average water here. El Nino, which is probably more popular, is when we have warmer than average water temperature here in the equatorial Pacific. So it's kind of the flip of that. Now, this is the third consecutive year. And what this means for areas up here in the Carolinas is we typically see the jet stream much more to the north. The subtropical jet stream, or what is sometimes referred to as the Pacific jet, is kind of the main storm track. The polar jet, often referred to as the polar front, is kind of what bottles up the cold air. So if you can get these two to sync up, that's where you see the biggest storm. So if you notice over the Ohio Valley, I'll advance this, you can see a little wet pattern across the Ohio Valley. That's where the storm tracks kind of overlap there. There's some cold air close enough and there's some moisture. But if you're south of there, which is most of the Carolinas in this kind of setup, we tend it to be warm and dry. But if you saw my forecast there, I actually forecasted slightly above average snowfall. Well, why did I do that? Well, I think that this little pocket of storminess could briefly shift down here over the Carolinas, at least for a week or two during the winter. This happened last winter, by the way, and it brought us above average snowfall. The other thing you noticed is our average, because of climate change, the warming climate, warmer sea surface temperature, less Arctic ice, we're seeing less prolonged cold and less snowfall in the Carolinas. So our average is actually falling to about 3.5 inches. So it doesn't take as much snow to be above average. So some of this has to do more with the overall pattern, just the fact that there's a lower bar to be surpassed for above average snowfall. And I think that's the biggest issue. So I'm looking at some of the questions we have here. One of the first questions we had, which is actually a pretty good question here, and this is a question I have for Brad. I want to know what creates the individual precipitation types, and what kind of types can we see mix at the same time? Is that possible? Well, this is probably the most difficult thing about forecasting winter weather here. A lot of times it's not the difference between rain and snow. It's the difference between rain, snow, sleet, or freezing rain. We've got 4 types of winter precipitation: a cold rain, we've got sleet, we've got freezing rain, and we've got snow. And ironically, of all of those winter precipitation types, the only one that requires it to be below freezing at the surface is actually freezing rain. All the other ones can occur when the temperature is above freezing at the ground, but it's cold enough above our heads. And I actually have a pretty good graphic that I think will help explain this, and I'll bring this up real quick. But this will kind of show you how this works. But it's a real good question, because I think in the Carolinas, this is probably the biggest thing we deal with is mixed precipitation, sometimes the mixed bag. And it's why it makes it so hard to forecast here, because, you know, we're not just talking about the temperature at the ground. I got to know what the temperature is like at different parts of the atmosphere. So there's a couple different types of winter precipitation. I'm going to show you a graphic here real quickly. It'll show you, well, it's going to hopefully show it to you real quickly. I would say we'll get it to load there. The graphics are loading really slow for some reason. Let me see if it loads here. Apparently not. We're going to show that real quickly. But the type of precipitation we're talking about is when you have cold air at the ground, warm air aloft, you get freezing rain. Warm air at the surface, cold air aloft, you can get sleet, snow, sometimes even something called graupel, which is kind of like a soft hail. So the layering, it's not the forecast at the ground, it's sometimes the layers above our heads. So 32.0 is freezing, 32.1 is liquid. So the small differences at different heights of the atmosphere can have a huge impact on the type of weather we see. So depending on, you know, what type of thicknesses of the atmosphere we have, we can get all kinds of different types of precipitation. So bear with me here, and we'll try to load this graphic real quickly. It took me a second to load it earlier. You know, we definitely don't have a lot of just all snow events here. It's kind of one of those things about living in the Carolinas. You know, it's probably going to start as rain, change to snow or sleet or freezing rain at some point. You can see the graphic there on the left. I actually am bringing that exact same graphic up. But you can see how the layering occurs. When you have warm air all the way to the ground, that tends to be rain. When you have shallower pockets of cold air, you tend to get different types of P types, we call it. And P types is like our vernacular for precipitation types. So when that happens, you tend to see different types of precipitation. What happens is that wedge of warm air can kind of move north and south over time. And what happens is you'll kind of go back and forth between one or the other. And sometimes in Charlotte will be just thick enough warm air for it to be rain. North Charlotte will be just enough cold air for it to change to sleet. And maybe Lake Norman, it's all cold air to be snow. And those are small changes of just maybe 10 miles, 5 miles, in tenths of a degree of temperature difference. And so that's a pretty significant difference in the type of weather you're going to see. So that's a really good question. As far as snowfall I expect, so if you saw in the forecast, I'm actually expecting slightly above average snowfall. Now, if we look back at recent La Nina winters, you go back to 2007-8, we were below average, a trace. 2010 and 11 sticks out to me because this was a really big anomaly year. We have La Nina. I expected it to be kind of warm, dry, and not much snow. Actually, it was pretty cool, and we had 6.1 inches. But most of the La Nina years, you can see we end up with below average snowfall, except for 2017-18, which is 4 inches. That would have been below average back then, because in 2020, we updated to 3.5. So really, if you look at this, only 2 of these years would have been above average. Last year being the one, 4.3, which if you go back 10 years ago, that's still below average. So you're not looking at huge amounts of snowfall with any of these. And one of the things I've been doing since I've been in Charlotte for the last 20 years is looking back at all of our averages. So what do the years look like as far as snowfall? Our all-time average is 5.5 inches. So if you go back to the beginning of measurements here in 1878, excuse me, we had about 144 years now, if you count this year. 5.5 is our average. But the 30-year average, this is the thing that people pay attention to. We use a 30-year average in meteorology and climatology. Every 10 years, that's updated. So what I mean by that is our current average goes from 1991 to 2020. In 10 more years, so that means in 2030, it'll be updated to 2001 to 2030. So it gets updated every 10 years, but it's a 30-year average. In the last 10 years, this average has dropped from 4.4 to 3.5. And in the last 10 years, it's only 2.6. So you can see there's a trend down. But if we look at just El Nino, La Nina, and La Nada, or neutral years, which is neither of those phases, La Nina years are the least amount of snow. The best snowfall totals we get are actually in neutral phases or El Nino. So this year, we're in that phase. But even though we're in that phase, actually I'm forecasting slightly above. So as far as snowfall, I'm expecting, if our average is 3.5, I think we're going to get close to 5 inches. So in that 4.5 to 5 inch range, probably pretty similar to what we saw last year. How many inches do you think will fall in December and January? That's a great question, Justin. One of the things about snowfall in Charlotte, it is not an early season event. We see very little snowfall in Charlotte early in the year. Our number one snowfall month is actually February, March. And statistically, the biggest snowfall day, the most snow that has fallen on a single calendar day, it's actually March 2nd. So we tend to see our snow much later in the year. And I actually have a graphic for that as well. And I actually can bring this up right now. This shows you when snow falls in Charlotte. This is a really good graphic. So if you look at December, only 18.3% of our snow has fallen in December, which is almost the same as March. But look at January and February. February is a month, which, remember, it's the shortest month. 28 days, normally 29 in the leap year. The fewest amount of days, but has the most snow. So if you want to see snow in Charlotte, it's really February, and I would say early March for snowfall. That last end of February into March tends to be when we see snow. Everyone who wants a white Christmas in the Carolinas, just doesn't happen. Did you realize statistically in Charlotte, there's a better chance of it being 70 degrees on Christmas Day than us seeing snow? It's just not very likely. We get one white Christmas about every generation or so. Our last one was in 2010, so it's going to be a while, at least if you look at the return frequency of those type of dates. What month do you think will have the most snow, Justin? Great question there again. I would say January, February, March. I would not count on much snow in December. The fact that it's actually been somewhat cold here in November probably even tells me more it's going to be a late season, because typically the way the atmosphere works, even in a warming climate, we see kind of an up and down motion. It gets cold, it gets warm, it gets cold. The fact that it was cold here in November likely means we're probably going to start November pretty warm, which means the chances of wintry weather are pretty low. January, February, March, probably going to be our best chance to see some wintry weather. So I really think that's the time frame for the best chances of snow. Now, I do have a forecast, my bold forecast, for those that ask how much we're going to see. This is kind of my general thinking, and I showed this in my winter outlook. So for Boone, the average, the current 30-year average, which remember, not too long ago, this was like 38, 39 inches, is now to 25.6. So that kind of shows you how much our climate has been changing, where the average snowfall in even Boone is now really low. I think we'll get 33 inches. Hickory, the average is about 6.9, used to be up around 8 or 9 inches. I'm going to go 7.6. And in Charlotte, our 30-year average, the new one, 3.5 inches. I'm going to go with 5.1. I rounded these off in my forecast to 8, 33, and 5. Because, I mean, let's be honest, we're probably not going to get that exact amount. Specific amounts of snow are really difficult to forecast. My forecast really revolves around above or below average. And so I always like to throw these out just to kind of give people a general idea what they're going to think. So Angela Wheeler, you asked about the mountains. Again, 33 inches up in Boone. I would expect the mountains to see slightly above, mainly because the mountains will benefit from northwest flow and more of that Ohio storm track. I'll go back to the La Nina storm track, because I think this is really key. For all the skiers out there and the folks that want to go to the mountains for snow, one of the things I like about La Nina winters for the mountains is the fact that the storm track with the wet, stormy weather is over the Ohio Valley. That's not too far away. Even a subtle shift brings the cold and storm track close enough to the mountains where they might see significant snow. Piedmont might not. So the fact that that's right there is you got a much better chance the farther north and west you go from Charlotte to see cold and snowy winters. The one thing I will tell you, though, that about this pattern that's kind of difficult is because cold air is bottled up here, sometimes it gets wedged up against the mountains, and the warm air is down here. We tend to get a lot more ice events during La Nina winter. So you got to be careful of La Nina setups in this situation, just because the cold air and warm air kind of split out. And as you know, cold air is really shallow. It's heavy, dense. It hugs the ground. So it'll wedge itself up against the mountains. And the warm, humid air will come in from the south right up and over that. And that's the perfect setup for ice. So we tend to see a lot more ice in that situation. A lot of folks asking about timing. When's it going to snow? When's our first snow? That is something that's just not knowable more than 7 days in the future. Even then, it's kind of questionable. So people say, hey, I'm going skiing on the third weekend in January. Is there going to be snow? I'll be honest with you, no idea. That's just not something that's in the realm of the science, because a specific date and time for snowfall more than 7 days in advance is really difficult. Because like I said before, the difference between snow and rain is 1/10 of a degree. That's hard to do tomorrow. If I say it's 80, I don't say it's 80.1 or 80.0, it's just it's 80, right? And you're asking 7 days in the future, is it going to be 32.0 or 32.1? Is it going to be snow or rain? It's a really difficult thing to do. And so that's why I wouldn't rely on apps or other sources of information. There'll be a ton of people on social media, and there'll be a ton of apps that will try to tell you it's going to snow 7-10 days in the future. Just because you can doesn't mean it's accurate. Precision is not accuracy, as I always like to say. So be very cautious of your phone app 7 to 10 days in the future, or a social media post that shows a big snowstorm a week from now. That's just not something in the science that's doable. There are patterns. When I look at long range, is there a pattern that's favorable for snow or not snow? I actually have some pretty good rules for snowfall, which I will bring up here in a minute. That'll kind of show you some of the totals. Question from William: do you think the warm water off the west coast will play a role? That's actually a really good question. Those questions about warm water are something that plays heavily into my forecast. And people are like, why does warm water have such a big impact on your forecast? Because the warm water influences the jet stream, and it also influences our moisture. So off the west coast of the United States, that warm water can affect the jet stream, especially the polar and the Pacific jet. It can buckle it further north. And if you get a buckle up to the north, out west, it typically causes a dip to the east. Now, what happens with warm water in the Gulf of Mexico and off the Atlantic, that could bring more warm, humid air in from the south. That can do two things. If you have a cold air mass, that's a good setup for snow. But if the cold air is not deep enough or doesn't push far enough south, that can overwhelm it, and it's just too warm for snow. So to answer your question, I would say that the Pacific warm water, that warm pocket of water off the Pacific Northwest, tends to create huge ridges up into the Gulf of Alaska. And those big ridges out west can sometimes, and this is why in La Nina winters, you can never rule out cold snaps, can drive a big sharp trough in the eastern or central US that brings cold air. If you guys remember a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, remember the big Arctic outbreak in Texas? Remember how the power grid completely failed and there was ice and snow down in Houston and San Antonio? That was a winter where it was warm for 80% of the winter, but a big ridge built off the West Coast and the cold air dove into the middle of the country. Now, here in the Carolinas, because that cold air went there, it naturally caused a little bit of ridging here. We were somewhat mild here. The cold air was there. So where that cold air sets up is at the middle of the country, the East Coast. That's something we won't know until it happens, but that's a really good question. So Gail has a question. So is this supposed to be a weak, moderate, or strong La Nina? Great question. Right now, it's a moderate La Nina, but it's still evolving. So it could strengthen as we get more into the winter. But as of right now, it looks like it's going to be a moderate La Nina. It's kind of a rarity. It's the third year in a row with La Nina. Typically, El Nino, La Nina, and the neutral phase tend to ebb and flow. You're either in one or the other from year to year. It's rare to have back-to-back years. We've had back-to-back El Ninos. I've seen back-to-back La Ninas. But this is the first time in the 20 years I've been here that we've had 3 years in a row of the same thing, La Nina. And that is pretty atypical. And as you know, we're kind of in a drought. If it wasn't for two tropical systems, we would certainly be in a severe drought. Those are the only rainfall systems we had in the last 2 months. Drought is a big part of La Nina, and that's why it's been so dry. And I would say up until the last week and a half, it's been pretty warm as well. So great question there. Greer, what are the odds of getting a snowy Panthers home game? You know, that's a great question. I get that question a lot. I love the Panthers. I love football. The thing about it, to get snowfall for a Panthers game, it's hard. Like I just showed you, it's hard to get snow in December. Unless you're playing playoff games in early to mid-January, you're probably not going to get snow for a Panthers game just because snow doesn't happen in December. That's the regular season. So, and the Panthers, even, I mean, they've had some good years franchise-wise. You need playoff games. The time we get snow in Charlotte is in the late playoffs, NFC Championship, Super Bowl years. And so that doesn't happen very often. So the chances of that happen here are pretty low, just statistically, I should say, and climatologically. It's just not very common to get snow during the regular season here in the Southeast. So it would have to happen during a huge, deep playoff run. And we'd have to have home games all the way through the NFC Championship game for it to be a legit chance. So that's a great question. We've had one home game where there might have been flurries. And I think it was an early January game not too long ago. But it's more likely to get severe weather or rainfall here for one of those games. It's not very common. So let me show you my rules of winter weather forecasting, because I really think this is a key part of what we do here at the station. And, you know, winter weather, people love snow. They love seeing snowfall forecasts. People love the Farmer's Almanac, even though it's really never right. Long range forecasting is a fool's errand. It just is for accuracy. And you're like, Brad, you're doing a winter forecast. What do you mean? I'm forecasting above and below. I'm not forecasting, you know, how much snow is going to fall on a certain date. So when you start seeing long range, you know, 7-10 day forecast, you know, I have a checklist. Whoops, and it keeps going away every time I pop it up. We'll try it again. There's a rule of thumb that we use, and I think it's something that I would recommend we all kind of abide to, especially when you start seeing social media posts. It's going to be right here, and I'm going to take off the check mark because obviously we don't have anything going on right now. So we'll take that check mark off there. So these are my rules for winter weather forecasting, 7 to 10 days out, which is kind of like super long range, the range of our 7 or 10 day forecast. Pattern recognition. Do we have a favorable pattern in the Southeast? So 7 to 10 days out, you might see me say, you know what? We got to watch next weekend or late next week or something like that. There's a pattern favorable for winter weather. Remember, winter weather doesn't mean snow all the time. It could mean sleet, ice, freezing rain, snow, or cold rain. So it's just a pattern recognition. Once we get in the 5 to 7 day range, you start, hey, Brad, is it trending up or down? I will say, hey, remember that thing I was telling you they'll keep an eye out for? It's trending colder. It's trending like it's going to be more, you know, wintry. And then 3 to 5 days out, this is where you start getting some concrete information. Like, hey, When is this thing going to hit? What type of storm is it going to be? Is it going to be snow? Is it going to be sleet or ice? We have a better idea. You know, and it's just honesty. It's not about, I could tell you 7 to 10 days out, but I'd be wrong. You know, being first is not as important as being right, in my opinion. So just letting you know about the pattern. And let's face it, it doesn't take you 7 to 10 days to prepare for a winter storm. It shouldn't. If it does, we have much bigger issues to talk about. 3 to 5 days out is where we kind of say, hey, you know what? You got travel plans, maybe go to the grocery store, fill the gas up in the car, maybe just be kind of ready. Then 1 to 3 days out, that's where the details come out. Amounts, location, timing, snow. I put out my first snowfall map, usually at the maximum 3 days out. Other than that, I'm going to show you probably in this range, the probability of seeing snow. Is it 60%, 70%, 80%, something like that? That's kind of the what we'll look at in that time range. Once you get into the 1 to 3 day time range, that's where you start to see more specifics, where we're going to put like actual forecast amounts, details, snowfall, that kind of thing. So those are the kind of things I want you to look for. Only a few more minutes left in our stream. So any last minute questions, this is your chance to ask me. And again, if you're watching this live, this is your chance to ask me, but you may be watching this on YouTube later. Put those in the comments. I'm going to go back to the comments and I'll try to answer these after the fact. Let me quickly show you again kind of the updated forecast here. And this is the general forecast. Snow and ice forecast for the Carolinas. I do think the Western Carolinas, parts of the mountains and foothills, will see slightly above average snow and ice. So that means above our 30-year average. For the Piedmont, probably slightly above to near average. And then you get to the coast, that's where we're going to see below average amounts. And again, there's not much snow or ice there to begin with. So the fact that we're going to see below average probably isn't a whole lot of solace for snow lovers, but there's probably a less of a chance there just because the warm air from the Atlantic and the Gulf is going to kind of overwhelm that. So check for any last minute questions. Don't see any more in there, guys. Okay. One last check of the forecast. And again, this is my bold forecast. Again, I don't like putting specifics out there, but here you go. 33.1 for Boone. Again, that's, you know, just the kind of general 33 inches. That's above our long-term average, 30-year average of 25.6. Hickory 7 is our average. I'm going to go closer to 8. So just you know, an inch above. Charlotte, our average has come down so much in the last 30 years, 3.5 inches. I'm going to go 5 inches. So if you think of last winter, we ended up with 4.3, which was above average, probably very similar to that. And that all came in 3 events in back-to-back weeks. So it all happened at once. But believe it or not, last winter was warmer than average and drier than average. So we ended up with above average snow in a warm year. And that might seem weird. It only needs to be cold and wet for 1 weekend for us to reach that total. If you have 4 weeks of warm, dry weather and 1 week of cold, wet weather, you can still end up being average on warm, dry, but end up with above average snow. So that's how it kind of works. The averages are just so low for snowfall around here. It doesn't take much to push us above. So great questions for everybody who chimed in. Thanks for watching. And again, if you have questions after this is off the live stream, put them in the YouTube channel, our Weather IQ page. Make sure you subscribe to that channel. My vlogs will be there. Our forecast will be there. We'll exclusively put a lot of content there. And if you ask questions in the comment section, we'll be sure to make sure we go back and try to answer those. So that's a great chance. There's the full screen. So the QR code is on your screen. If you have your phone and you're watching on your desktop, you can do that. Or if you're watching on our live stream, just hit that subscribe button. We'd love to get you on that channel. You get notifications every time I do a vlog. And by the way, when there is going to be winter weather, I will do a vlog usually in this 3 to 5 day, maybe even longer range if I think it's confident that it's going to happen. And you can get the updates on what we're thinking so ahead of time. So thanks again for tuning in. That's our winter weather outlook. The 19th year we've done this. Let's hope for at least one good snowstorm. I love snow. One would be great. Otherwise, we'll be seeing some warmer temperatures for the holiday, by the way. If you're looking ahead to Thanksgiving, maybe near 60 degrees. So warmer temperatures on the way. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. And make sure you subscribe to our Weather IQ page. We'd love to get you on there.